Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy. And today's video is going to be another part in our series about written in stone, the calendar changing from 360 days to 365 days, what the Bible says about it, and what secular history says about it. We're mixing the two together today. We're going to finish up our story about the gold on the plains of Dura. Now, if you haven't watched the other previous parts, you need to go back and look at that, otherwise you're going to be completely lost. But we've already discussed how Nebuchadnezzar has brought the people from Israel into captivity. He's taken control of Israel, the land, and he's brought back all of that gold that Solomon stockpiled when he should have been resting. And he's built this huge image. And basically that's all the Bible calls it, is a huge image. But it describes it and it appears to be similar to other things that were built around that time known as obelisks. So we're out here on the plains of Dura at this huge gold obelisk, and it has been set up as a sundial. And as we said earlier, sundials were not used for telling the time, they were used for telling you what days to worship which gods. As that shadow would fall across different areas in the courtyard, it would indicate which god's feast day it was. And the gods, there was 12 of them, and it didn't matter if you're an Egyptian, Assyrian, Phoenician, Greek, Roman, Babylonian, Median, Persian. They all had 12 gods, and they all had this way of worshiping the gods that included setting up some kind of a pointer so that a shadow from that pointer could fall across some gods. Now, the story is going to be about three Hebrew young men named Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah. Now, I'm all the time telling you, if you're going to learn anything about the Bible, you need to get out of church. At the very least, you need to get church out of your head, because as long as you're trying to mix truth with church teachings, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to have a clear mind, a so-called open mind, to understand the things I'm about to tell you. Now, you're going to tell me that I'm throwing a lot of things in there that aren't in the Bible, and you don't have to. I'm going to tell you there's a lot of things that are not in the Bible that I'm going to say today. But they line up with secular history, and they also line up with other books of the Bible, and they make other books of the Bible understandable. Now, if you're in a church that calls these three young men, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, you are in a satanic cult. Those are their satanic titles that were given to them by Nebuchadnezzar. That was not their names. And I'm going to tell you what their names mean. In the real world, Azariah's name means Jehovah has helped. But his title was Abednego, meaning servant of Lucifer, or servant of light. And that's only right. I mean, the Bible says that Satan keeps transforming himself to an angel of light. The next one, Mishael, means who is like God. But the title he was given, Meshach, means who is what Aku is. And Aku is actually the son of Lucifer and Eve, the very first Nephilim. And that, if you don't buy into that, go back and watch my other series called The All-Seeing Eye that explains what that means. The All-Seeing Eye is a symbol on the back of the $1 bill. That series explains why the all-seeing eye became what it was, because it started off as the Eye of Ra. And there's a difference between the two. If you go back and compare them, you'll understand what that's about. The last one, Hananiah, his name means God who is gracious. But his satanic title was Shadrach, which means command of the moon god. Moon god was Sin, Ashtoreth, Easter, Ishtar, and Eve. So you can see that all three of the satanic trinity are in their names. And interestingly enough, the reason I even bring this up is the 12-month satanic calendar didn't come about till after the flood. The flood actually destroyed the entire religious system as it existed before the flood, and so Satan had to come out with a new scheme. So he went from a Trinitarian all-seeing eye scheme to a 12-god scheme. But within that 12 gods, no matter what culture you went to, no matter what kind of devices they used to keep track of their feast days, those three were always there. Now, another reason I say that these were titles and not actual names is because these gods, each god, which could represent a different aspect of Satan's personality, but I think actually I can prove to you later that it is actual separate demons. So there's Satan, there's Eve, there's his Nephilim offspring, and then there's still 9 other demons that are actual demons that are in control of a lot of things that we'll talk about later. But in any case, these 3 are brought out here and told that they're going to worship this God. Now, I've always seen these pictures where they're out on this plain, there's that big thing, there's nothing to do with the sundial anywhere around in the pictures, and thousands of people are all bowing together. But I have a suspicion. It says that these 3 were being trained for positions within the government, and I think that their positions involved what each of the gods did. In other words, today we'll have a Secretary of Defense because we don't recognize where that Secretary of Defense takes his orders from. But back in the day, Secretary of Defense took his orders from the God of War. So his title would have been Servant of the God of War. And that's what these titles were of Shadrach, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. That's the titles indicating what they were in charge of within the jurisdictional district, as a, according to which God took care of that particular function. They were the servant of that God. So they're brought out here. They're put on their spots on this calendar, and they're all told to bow whenever the horn blows, whenever you hear the drum, it's time to bow. That means that the sun is at about right position where it's getting ready to throw the shadow of its obelisk across the image of the all-seeing eye. Now, back then, the magic practicing priests probably realized that this was just a trick, that all they were doing was making a device to count off the days. But to those people, seeing that shadow fall across the all-seeing eye meant that they were going to have a good year, the good crops and wealth and conquest and warfare. And so it was very important to them to see that happen. It had happened for thousands of years. There was no doubt it was going to happen again, and the priests knew that. Maybe the priests didn't this time. We don't know exactly how God changed the year or when he changed the year, but it may be that that was already starting to take effect, and the priest had noticed that the shadow wasn't falling across the gods quite the way it was supposed to. But at this time, they're not. If they're wise to it, they're not letting on. So everybody goes out. They blow the horns. They beat the drums. Everybody bows down to the obelisk except Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So report goes back to the king that Satan is not happy. He did not throw his shadow over his queen. Nebuchadnezzar has got to be, he's incensed. The Bible says he's enraged. He has conquered these people, brought them back into captivity, brought their gold back with him, taken over their land, done everything in his power to make Satan happy, and Satan's not happy. Why is that? Because those 3 refused to bow down to him. So Nebuchadnezzar brings them in. Says, we're going to do this over again tomorrow, and tomorrow you are going to bow down, because if you don't bow down, my God is not going to be happy. We're not going to have good crops. Everything's going to be bad for us, and I'm not going to accept that. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah tell Nebuchadnezzar, King, we don't even have to talk to you about this. We're not going to bow down to your God. We serve Jehovah. We're not serving your gods. So anyways, they drag him out there the next day, do the same thing over again. Once again, Mishael, Hananiah, Azariah do not do what they're supposed to do. The king has him instantly grabbed up by his strong men, brought to a furnace, and thrown in alive. And how hot is a furnace? It's so hot that the men that throw them in burn to death just by throwing them in. But then something strange happens. They look into the furnace, and they can see Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah walking around with somebody else. It doesn't say who, but that somebody else is Michael, the prince of his people. Later, Michael himself would do a courageous act. It's so courageous that he became not the prince of his people, but the ruler of his people, the archangel. And we'll talk about that another time. But in any case, Nebuchadnezzar looks in and he goes, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, what's going on in there? Come out. And they walk out. And from that moment on, Nebuchadnezzar understands like his God is powerless, and the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is almighty. He gives orders that anybody who says anything bad against these 3 men or against their God is to be killed and have their house turned into a public restroom. Anyway, as we said before, these 3, servant of light, Abednego, Aku, or who is what Aku is, Meshach, and Shadrach, meaning command of the moon god. Those are the three gods of the original Trinity. There are also three of the gods that are represented on this 12-god system that they used. And it all ties into the calendar. I mean, if you're not aware that this is about the calendar, and look, yeah, this is just my opinion, right? Because obviously it's not written in the Bible like this. But I'm telling you that there are prophecies that are about to be fulfilled. That if you do not understand this information exactly as I just told it to you, you are not ever going to be able to understand the prophecies. And the proof is in the pudding. If you're in a church, ask them, what is the prophecy of the 42 weeks or months? What is the prophecy of the times, and half a time? What is the prophecy of the 1,260 days? What is the prophecy of the middle of the week? What is the prophecy of any prophecies? And they'll tell you either it's a mystery, which they're right about that, because prophecy is supposed to be a mystery to God's enemies, but it's not supposed to be a mystery to God's friends. Or they will come up with some kind of silly thing that after you've heard it, after you've read it, after you've looked at the pictures, you still don't understand it. I am going to show you what the fulfillment of prophecy that's about to happen in a way that you can understand it. Very simple, plain English, right out of the Bible. And I want you to remember that I did that, because as time goes on, the things I'm talking about are going to start happening. Right now, you're being told about what the future holds from you by me. But when it actually happens, the churches are going to try to convince you that they told you when they didn't. And they're going to give you a cover story, just like the flood. When the flood came, everybody knew it was because God was mad at people for building cities and doing the stuff we do. But after the flood, cover stories coming out, you know. Oh, there was a war between the good God and the bad God. And you know, we're going to fix all this. And now the cover story is Ice Age. So there will be a cover story for when the calendar goes back to 360 days, the empire, the churches, whoever is here is going to have a cover story. Don't buy into it. Prepare yourself now. Clean your mind out so you can get ready. That's all. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.